let's talk about the Canon R5. Is it really a professional level camera, or is it one that's really meant for an enthusiast? So let's get started. Hey guys, Tiago with Classical Technology here. Thank you for joining me for another video. Remember to smash that like button, subscribe if you like my content, and leave a comment below. Now let's talk about the Canon R5. A lot of people were hyped up about this camera, and all of a sudden all that hype disappeared when people saw that indeed it was overheating in many of the 8K and even the high quality 4K modes. This video now is being shot on the Canon R5 on 8K RAW, so let's talk about if this camera is really for the professional market or maybe it's really meant for the enthusiast market. So let's get right to it. The number one thing that kind of cripples this camera for professional use, let's say if you're like a wedding filmmaker or something like that, you're going to start shooting in the higher quality modes, the slow motion modes, and within the first few hours you're definitely going to run into this overheating issue over and over again as you try to record. The way that it is now, it does kind of stack these issues, so it's not like you can just cool the camera off for a few minutes and you can go back to shooting. So that certainly is a problem. That's why I believe Canon is most likely working on some type of firmware update. Maybe they'll change some of the timings or something like that. So our first point here is that for professional use, especially if it's a camera that you plan to use all day, it's definitely not going to be a video workhorse. Now, as a photo camera, it's it's amazing, great autofocus, and you can shoot pictures. It's not going to overheat like it does in the 8K video modes. But as a video camera, as a professional, it's definitely going to be a no-go, because if you're doing something like filming a wedding, you're going to have to either bring like 4 or 5 of these to make it through the whole day, or rely on a different camera. And if you're actually using it for a film or in a more professional environment, you're still going to run into those issues, because after certain takes, the camera may not be ready after you're using it for a while. So it's definitely going to be a little bit frustrating. And yes, of course, you can work around that. You can really time your shots where the camera is going to be cool and not overheat. But that doesn't really make sense to do in a professional environment, because you have to be the most efficient possible with your tools. And then the second point, which is a counterpoint to the first, is this camera better suited for the enthusiast? And by that, I mean by somebody who's still going to take advantage of all the power and features that it has, but they're not necessarily tied down to a professional environment. I think that's really who this camera is for, especially considering the type of technology that's in it. It's fairly advanced. There's no other camera like this that has 8K RAW with this size, including all the features that it has, IBIS and different things like that. So I really do think that this camera is really geared very nicely towards that person that really likes cameras and technology. They want to be sort of on the bleeding edge of all types of technological advances. And of course, with that comes all these shortcomings that are a lot easier to work around if you're an enthusiast. Because if you're just filming for fun or filming yourself, or if it's a personal project where it's not necessarily professional, you're going to have a lot more latitude. If your camera overheats, maybe you can wait an hour or two. You don't have a set, or you don't have people that are depending on you to use the camera, and maybe perhaps you can use another camera or something like that. So for the enthusiast, I really think that this camera is pretty awesome, just because you can work within its limitations a lot better. You're not relying on time and other people, and at the same time you get to enjoy what a great piece of technology that this is. I know there's been a lot of stuff said about this camera concerning the overheating, but it does have a wonderful image. It has a lot of technology in it. The autofocus is awesome. And of course, the professional user is just going to be limited by these overheating and record limits, which I really think are definitely going to be the biggest handicaps for a professional to use this. Of course, there are other little limitations as well, aside from just the overheating. Like if you're going to do 8K RAW, the file sizes are really, really enormous, so you're going to need a lot of storage. That's not really the best for professional use as well. But even if you're doing something like the 4K HQ or high quality mode, something like that looks great. And the 4K 60p, the 120 frames also, so you can do slow motion. So all that stuff looks great. But for professional use, the time limitation with overheating really doesn't make this a workhorse. I could perhaps see somebody who has something like a C200 or a C300 as their main cinema camera. Maybe that's what they're shooting on all day. I could see them using something like this for maybe just some B-roll shots throughout the day, stuff that they don't need constantly. Maybe it is something that they can just shoot 5 to 10 minutes here or there, and then the camera may stay off for a few hours as they're using their C200 or C300 for the main footage. Something like that, a use case like that, then yes, you can use it in a professional environment. Now, we're just talking about primarily using the R5 as the professional tool, which it has some of those tools that you would think would be apt for such an environment, such as, the raw recording, great image quality, but it does have these other limitations. Perhaps another reason why this right now would be limited for professional use, the dynamic range on the camera, while it's okay, it's definitely lacking compared to some of the other cameras on the market, like the Panasonic S1H, even the new Red Komodo. So the dynamic range isn't quite there yet. This isn't nearly as important for every time of filming scenario, but it's something to keep in mind. If you want the best quality possible, you do have to step to some other cameras to get that really nice dynamic range. Now, with these firmware updates, it's also possible Canon's going to add C-Log 3, which does give you more dynamic range, and that may bring it more in line with everything else. And with these future firmware updates, if they can also kind of fix these limitations with the recording modes, I think the camera could perhaps in the future be completely different than it is today, and then maybe we could use it for professional use. It's not just going to be for the enthusiast, but for now, I think it's perhaps for the professional occasional use when they can have another camera, or basically better geared for the enthusiast who can better experience these sort of really high quality formats and the technology that's within this camera, and they can more easily work around the limitations. It's not going to affect anything with their job or anything like that. So definitely this is an enthusiast camera. Anytime that happens, you're on the bleeding edge. You're going to have a lot of issues to sort of wade through. That's pretty common in sort of the PC hardware and like the PC, gaming PC market. Sometimes you'll have very powerful hardware, but it's going to have a little bit more bugs. And while it may be great at certain things, it's going to be more limited in others. And that's the same thing with this camera. Usually a professional workhorse camera is something that just works all the time. It's not always the latest and greatest, but it's often maybe like a generation behind or something like that, often a little bulkier, like with a bigger camera with a fan in it. So if you want a small mirrorless camera like this to do 8K RAW, it's definitely going to have those limitations. In the future, it's either going to have maybe different hardware or be a lot bigger so you can have fans in there. But for now, I really think it's a great enthusiast camera, but it's not such a great professional camera because you're going to have to cherry pick the times you can use it. Of course, I really do enjoy this camera. I think it has beautiful colors, beautiful image quality. All the features are pretty awesome, like the IBIS is fantastic. Autofocus is very, very nice. So if you can sort of use it within its limits, I think it is a really, really great camera. You just have to keep these limits in mind and see how it works with your use case. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. Remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.